Thank you very much and good afternoon. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge we are on Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Inuit, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. I'd like to introduce the panel members and Secretary of the Board and the assessor today. Panel members are Kent Seelan and Bill Maretsky, and myself, I'll be chairing. My name is Mike Colatrulio. From administrative personnel is Tristan Breeden, and from the assessment department is Jeremy Pohl this afternoon. To the Zoom participants of the hearing, please note you are placed in the waiting room until your property is called upon. When it is your turn, you will be admitted into the meeting. Kindly follow along the City of Winnipeg's Board of Revision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you into the hearing, please close or mute your YouTube player. You will then be permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing has concluded, you can leave the meeting. We'll be hearing application for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of property are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by council and is independent of it and the city administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note the board's decisions with respect to the application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if it pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if matters pertain to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included in the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all evidence about the application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing item number 2 on our docket today. Mr. Breeden, please affirm the assessor and the applicant's testimony. Thank you.
Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Jeremy Ryan Pohl.
You affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Mr. Slaughter, please state your full name.
Rod Slaughter.
Okay. Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Neufeld, please state your full name.
Atherton Neufeld.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
All right, Mr. Pohl, can we hear from you regarding the location at 975 Henderson Highway? I understand that the class code 60 portion of this, being the McDonald's on this site, is not in contention at this point. My understanding from comments made prior to going on live here.
That's my understanding as well. I can, and I will have to go through it quickly just to get it on record, but there's no contention.
That is correct.
If we can move it along as quickly as possible, that will help. We can concentrate on the balance of the problem afterwards. Mr. Cole, let's have your presentation at this point. Thank
Okay.
you.
First, before we get going, I sent a revised brief in to the board. I just want to make sure the applicant got it. And the only thing that changed was my page 15. And on my page 15, it'll be 603 St. Mary's. It's highlighted in yellow, or should say orange. There was a basement lease included in that. I took that basement lease out, and that lowered that rental value a little bit, which of course lowered the weighted average and median rents for our analysis. So that's the only thing that changed. Small issue, but the numbers
And
changed.
forgive me, Mr. Pohl, let me interrupt you for just a moment. If I go to page 15 of the document that I have in front of you that was sent, you're referring to what address, sir, again?
603 St. Mary's, that'll be comp 3. It should be, if you have the revised brief, it should be in orange, the changes that were made.
Okay, I do not have the changes that were made in orange at this point.
I sent it in.
Yes, it should be in there right now.
Okay, just give me a moment, please. And let me see about reopening. Is that the revised one? Oh, here, revised, gotcha. Okay,
Okay,
and let me just verify quickly, please. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. That has been received and that has been noted. So,
Okay.
please, Mr. Cole, go ahead.
okay. So the roll number is 0203023710. The civic address is 975 Henderson Highway. The 2025 value total is 11,773,000, and the 60 and 40 split as indicated at 2,254,000 for the 60, and sorry, it shouldn't have been that. 1 second here. Just check. Is 9,519,000. Sorry. The property itself, the actual year built was 2003 for the Winnipeg Regional Health property. The effective year built for the McDonald's was 2016. In 2016, there was a fire, and I'll go through that in my brief. So I'll just kind of go through the McDonald's portion as we turn to page 3. Page 3, as we see, it's on Henderson. The McDonald's is out front. The Winnipeg Regional Health property is out back. There is some parking on site. We don't have that accounted for. They collect 40 some odd thousand gross. That was something I haven't added for in this hearing, but I do want to point that out because it does show that up, and it does show that in their rent roll. I should see in their finances, so financial statement. So if you go to page 4, shows the permit removal for the McDonald's, and as you go through on page 5, it shows the original McDonald's that was there, and then of course there was a fire, and they rebuilt it as such. It increased a small amount. As you would rebuild a building, they went straight from the pad that was there, and they rebuilt. So, and I don't have an action shot. I should say, I think it's the first one in an actual assessment brief on page 6, but that was the actual fire that occurred on site. So they removed the building in total, and they rebuilt the building. I want to point out over the next few pages shows the new McDonald's as it sits. This was a cost that was not borne by the property owner. The McDonald's is a pad site lease, so the entire cost that was due to the fire was bared by McDonald's Corporation, McDonald's Canada, and they paid their lease. Their lease didn't change. The lease rate didn't change. It just simply their building was destroyed and they rebuilt it. So if you look on page 15, or I should say on page 14, is the Winnipeg Regional Health Permit for the building. It was taken out in 2002. And we have our comparables on page 15. What we're trying to establish here is for the Winnipeg Regional Health property, the marketplace is two-sided. It's tenant and property owner. What we've established here in the rent comparables that I brought in is that's what would be the marketplace for an owner of a site to let our Winnipeg Regional Health come in, develop the property for site to suit, and it is site to suit. What rent would be applicable to that? In this case here, we would go around, and we have gone around the city to see exactly what owners would and do expect as far as compensation for the site development, the income that could generate off that development of Winnipeg Regional Health on their sites. Obviously, the long term, it'll take up all of the site, if not the majority of it. And there's substantial leases that are in place. They're usually 20-year leases with a 10-year. Excuse me, I'm just getting over being sick. With a 10-year term, usually for a third term. So what we see here are long-term leases, and I've broken it out for other access centers, health clinics, larger size tenancies. There's 14 comparables. There's 484,000 square feet. And we see that the median CRU size is around 33,000 square feet. We have an average of, on the revised, $19.70, $19.72, or average, or weighted average $19.72, and a median of $19.22. So from that, underneath that, I have some lesser than properties that are smaller, that are not akin to an access center or a larger clinic, but they're still Winnipeg Regional Health property. So this is kind of like the lower end. And you see that for 47,560 square feet. And the median CRU sizes dropped significantly. They're no longer centers, so to speak. The average rent is $16.57. The weighted average is $16.96, and the median is 15. So we see there is some segregation between the two. But we are using and looking at the whole of Winnipeg Regional Health, what they primarily pay in the marketplace and what owners expect. And you see that on comps 1 through 14. Highlighting comp number 1 is obviously the subject property. Subject property was built in 2002, so obviously it took completed in 2002. By the time the lease was negotiated, everything was planned out. You'd expect that market determination was a couple of years earlier. So this is reflective of what that market would have been at that point in time, and they negotiated a long-term lease based on that. What we're looking at today is what would a property lease up reference date, unencumbered by lease, and what would the Winnipeg Regional Health expect to pay. So what I did is I looked at all comparables for 1 through 14, took a weighted average, and median. They're very tight, very close, and determined that if, and again, 975 Henderson, the subject property, plays a role in it. What does it work out to be? So it works out to be hovering around $20, a little under $20 a square foot. So from that point, we can look at, and again, the comparables are starting on page 16. If you want to take a look at them, access centers, clinics, and so forth. And it goes all the way to page 20, where some of the lesser than smaller CRU size Winnipeg Regional Health spaces that are out in the community. So from that point, it ends on page 22. So you can have a good look at what those properties are versus what the subject property is. And you can see, stand out, they're quite different. So on page 23 starts the comparables for the restaurant. Since we're not contesting it, I won't go through it. There for your reading. On page 24 is and I'll read it into the record. The restaurant, the McDonald's, it is 5,259 square feet. We have it at $28.67 a square foot. And that produces a PGI of $150,881. Vacancy at 4% gives us an effective gross income of $144,846. Expenses at 3%, shortfall at $9 gives us a net operating income of $130,608. Capped at 6.15% gives us our rounded value of $2,254,000. So on the next page, we have the 40S, which is Winnipeg Regional Health. We have 39,000 square feet. We have $18.06 modeled, so it's a tad under what the market is for Winnipeg Regional Health properties, and it's a few dollars over what the lease was. You know, we're going back 20 years now, what the market was deemed then. So the argument that I see here is it contract rent or is it market rent? In my opinion, is the market rent would be approaching $20, but at $18.06, I see no reason to change that. So from that point, we have a PGI of $704,340. 6% for vacancy gives us effective gross income of $662,080. Expenses at 3%, shortfall at $8 gives us a net operating income of $623,498. Capped at 6.55% gives us our $9,519,000 rounded. Again, there is some parking on site. It does generate some income, but it really is nominal to the overall value. So at that point, I did not include it for the purpose of this appeal. So on the next page over, on page 26, is the income value summary. And that gets us back to the $11,773,000. I'd like to point out the 2023 value was confirmed by the Board of Revision at $12,909,000. It has been appealed to the municipal board, so it is an active appeal. But at this point, I think that's all I have. On page 28 is the income expense questionnaires if you need to go over them, and the rent roll. So I don't think there's any contention with the rent that's in place. So with that, I'm open to questions.
All right. Mr. Slaughter, I believe you are going to introduce Mr. Neufeld with respect to the appeal that is on the class code 40 section of this, correct?
That is correct. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. I guess now, Mr. Slaughter, you will not be asking questions. Mr. Neufeld will be asking questions. Is that correct? Mr. Neufeld, you're up.
Thank you.
Let's have questions.
Mr. Hall, what does the International Association of Assessing Officers say about using sales involving government agencies or charities?
Not exactly sure where you're getting at. That's not in my brief. Is that
Are you a member of that association?
an international assessing officer?
I was under the impression you were. I can go over that in my brief then, that's fine. Sales, your comparables that you have, number 9, 12, and 13.
Yes.
Highest of your WRHA ones. Are you aware that they're between related parties?
Was not aware of that.
Would that skew your number down a fair bit if those were taken out?
Well, not exactly. I'd have to rerun them, but I'd like
They are on
documented.
the higher.
I'd like documented proof and as a rebuttal as far as if that is the case.
Well, I mean, the WRHA and the hospital, I think it's kind of simple in there. The booth is owned by the hospital. The WRHA is the tenant. They are the funding of the hospital. Same with Concordia Hospital, they're part of the hospital. Okay.
Mr. Chair, sorry,
Yes,
what page,
Oh, sorry,
the
page
applicant
15 of
are-
the
Sorry?
assessor's brief. Page 15 of the assessor.
but
Yeah,
you said
and you were-
sales, did you? Sales?
Well, sorry, leases.
Yeah,
You meant leases then? Okay,
Yeah.
So.
okay, sorry,
so,
Mr. Chair.
Newfound, to be absolutely clear, you were suggesting that there were what, three
Three.
leases that were not arm's length? And those were which ones, please?
Number 9, number 12, and number 13.
number 9, number 12,
And the
number
Concordia
13.
Hip and Knee. So the Concordia Hip and Knee is the hospital. They are funded by the WHA. And 280 Booth is on the Grace.
So I have this on a spreadsheet and I don't have any proof to verify that, but I'll take it at your word for the moment. That reduces the average rent when I take those three comparables out to $18.58, $18.84. Or sorry, average $18.58, weighted average $18.84, and a median of $18.54. So, so it does pull it down a little bit. It's right at market rent.
And is it typical for offices in the entirety of the city to be rented for 15 to 20 years like this, like the bulls you brought forward?
For site-specific properties, absolutely. For market properties, larger parcel properties, typically, longer-term rents are in place where you're gonna secure 10, as you move downwards in CRU size, you get more variance and more transient marketplace.
So you said the market generally isn't doing that? Is that, sorry, I kind of, you're
For
saying
smaller
market properties?
for smaller CRU sizes, the length of lease is typically less. For larger tenant properties and site-specific properties, obviously, they're site-specific. Long-term leases are usually the norm.
What do you mean by site specific?
This property was built for Winnipeg Regional Health, site-specific.
So if it's built for a specific user, they're using longer term leases. Is that typical? That's
Would it make sense for Winnipeg Regional Health, the property owner, to agree to a site for a 3-year lease so they can walk away from?
correct. So you're saying, forget, that's fine. Do you have any cap rates to support your 655?
I don't have any direct utilization rates. We have the, excuse me, on page 27, and I might have glossed over that, the actual capitalization chart that we have. So we have it in a range, as I indicated, for the medical office page here. We had 6.55%.
And that would be suburban A or suburban B?
Be suburban A, and it's still within a suburban B. But I mean, your tenant that you have and the quality of finish, if you're looking at a suburban A, this would definitely fall into that range.
Fair enough, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions. No, those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Steelan, questions of the assessor?
My questions have been answered. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Maretsky, please, if you have any questions.
Yeah, just on the, a few questions on the income and expense mailer.
Sure.
If I look at that page, and I'll see if I can get down to it here. Page 28.
Yep.
So if I look at the total expenses, or sorry, the profit and loss, 445,943, but in there is interest expense and amortization expense. So that normally wouldn't be included in the expense, correct?
No, most typically not. Mortgage interest for sure. But if you look at the mortgage interest, it's quite low. It's 32,134 for this property. Could be that the mortgage is paid off in most part or whatever. I can't really answer why it was that low. Typically you see a higher mortgage, but given that it's 20 years into it, it may be at that rate at this point. So
Okay, just on another matter, I'll continue with my questioning, Mr. Chair, but I'm having some technical issues when Mr. Pohl is speaking. I'm getting an echo effect, so I'm
hearing it too.
having a hard time understanding what he's saying. Does anybody else have that problem in there?
The odd time it does echo a bit. Mr. Seelan, you're having the same issue?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair.
Mr.
And I'm
Newfeld,
having the same issue hearing you guys. Like it seems like it's everyone.
Yeah.
Or
Might be
maybe
me
it's-
not muting. Someone muted for me, so I'll keep an eye on it and make sure I'm not doing it.
Okay, because it might be someone has their YouTube player on potentially? No?
I don't
We'll
have it
go
on.
forward with the best we can. If something comes out a bit too garbled and you didn't pick it up, we can circle back to it anytime.
Okay, so anyways, thank you. What I was getting at with the profit and loss is if that interest wasn't included in there, the profit would be a little bit higher, somewhere around 558,000, if I'm not not incorrect on that.
Yeah, and that's
So-
kind of sorry, go ahead.
Comparing with what you've allowed, the total for the two properties or the two not properties, but buildings, that's about 762,000 you have in your brief. I'm just wondering, that's for 22, that your expenses for 22 are quite a bit less than what you've allowed there. I mean, your net operating income is quite a bit less than what you actually have.
And that's where I kind of highlighted between, is it leasehold contract that you're looking at from 20 years in the past that is reflective of market today, or should you be looking at market unencumbered by lease? What would the building lease for if it was leased again? Winnipeg Regional Health is clearly at around the $19-20 mark for a building of this caliber. We're in at a little at around the $18 mark. So what I'm saying is, once you take that into account, your net operating income would naturally be greater. The decision the board that I see as in my mind's eye to make is, are you going to put a market rent from 20 plus years ago that was negotiated as a better indicator of what they're currently paying now, what the market's currently paying now?
Okay,
And with
so
that,
maybe
the NOI would be going up.
in that vein, then if I just clarify these leases here on page 15. So the start dates, I'm talking about the top ones here, the higher end ones, 1 to 14. The start dates are in the fourth column to the right. So those net per square foot rents there, is that for when these have started?
That's for when they would be started. Obviously, there's some newer builds here. There's some older builds too. But typically, what I reflect is, as you go along with it, I apologize, I'm getting over being sick. Sorry. The newer properties as they're being built, say from 2009, 2015, 2010, those are reflective of closer to the reference date. Versus something that was built in 2003, such as the subject property. So when we're looking at that, those are more reflective of what this would achieve if it would be leased out. And obviously the player that would be leasing out is Winnipeg Regional Health. There's a market, and part of that is the owner of the property and obviously Winnipeg Regional Health. So what does Winnipeg Health pay to other property owners around the marketplace? And you see that reflective on your page 15, 1 through 4. So we're not going to have any more comparables that we have to show here, as that's the totality of Winnipeg Regional Health.
Okay, just another FYI for my own information question. What's an access center?
Access center is typically, well, I mean, they meet different uses. I've been inspected quite a few of them. I don't believe I inspected the subject property here. This was not part of Colors inspections that we went through all the rest of them. But typically it's your less than hospital care. It's if you need a hospital, you go to the hospital. If you go and you need less than that, you go to an access center. If you need medical advice, you go to an access center. If it's more urgent, kind of in the middle, you may go to hospital, you may go to the access centers as well. Booth is a good example of that. How that one's set up is you walk in, and if you need a ER, you go to the ER. If you need less than that, you go the other way and you go to the access center. So I believe these were built to alleviate some of the need and or some of the strain that was put on the medical in the medical system for Winnipeg Regional Health as far as diverting patients away from an ER room if they don't necessarily need to be there.
Thank you very much for that information and your other answers as well. Thank you. No further questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And I believe my questions have been addressed already. I don't think I have anything further to ask the assessor at this point. So, Mr. Slaughter, I guess I'll come back to you for a moment, and you can, I guess, introduce Mr. Neufeld and what he's going to be doing at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mr. Neufeld will present evidence on behalf of the tenant of WRHA.
All right.
Thank you.
And you represent the owner of the site in its totality, correct?
That is correct. We had filed the appeal on behalf of the owner. Colliers represents the major tenant, WRHA. There is no contention with the remainder of the valuation, and therefore we are deferring to the evidence of the tenant's agent.
Thank you very much, Mr. Slaughter. I much appreciate your comments. Mr. Neufeld, let's walk through your presentation, sir.
Thank you. So as the assessor mentioned, it is an access center. So they're generally set up much like any other suburban office. If it were to go dark, it could be used just as easily as a regular office. Sorry, I'm just on the wrong. When we look through these WRHA rents, they're all cost recovery leases, and they're not what we would consider market rents. Government agencies, landlords, when they rent to government agencies, know that the tenant there is based off policy, not on a market decision. So they're essentially at the whims of government. They sign them to as long as they can for as high as they can in order to get the cost recovery over one term of the lease. So they want the entire building, when they build for them, to be paid off in one transaction, in one lease. That's not a typical market transaction. So when we're looking at these, we look and say, if the WRHA were to cease to exist tomorrow, if our government privatizes medical care, what would this office then be looking for in the marketplace? And we use $16. At $16, I will go through that. My comparables after, but $16 I think is very fair for what this property would rent in the open market. Vacancy I used was 3% because I assumed what the assessor would be agreeing with, calling it medical. Now they do have the WRHA medical rent that they're putting on it, but then they went to 6% for vacancy, like another suburban office. I would contend that we could switch to the 6, but we're okay with the 3 either way. Non-recoverables are applied to every property. Sometimes they have high cost, sometimes low cost. We stabilize it at 5%. 2% is a structural reserve. It's like a condo reserve fund if they need to make something that's kept aside for capital improvements and so forth. Shortfall, again, we were lower. We calculated it based off of the taxes, the utilities that are used by the city for the business tax assessment, and a $1 repair and maintenance. We're lower, but the city's at 8, so either or is fine as well. And then the cap rate, 7.75. Higher than the city. We don't believe that there are many 6.55 transactions in the office market at all. Office is in a very strange place in our city. I will take you to my cap rates. One I want to address on page 46. Prior to that, all these offices that did sell were repurposed or for owner usages. 363 Broadway, that's the building the municipal board is in, sold for a 12% cap with 90% occupancy. And that's what's going on in our office marketplace right now. There's no hope, there's no faith that these will be long-term strong investments with the changing office landscape. It's investors are focusing more on multifamily. Retail is somewhat stable, and then office is just it's dangerous. So I think that to say that there's a 6.55% cap on this property when there's nothing to even show that support buying, it's just I don't even know where they get that from. Going back to my rents, I want to bring you to I'm not going to touch on 3 and 4. Those were mostly for another property that was somewhat similar. But page 5 is this is 850 Pembina. Now, if the WHA were to move out, this would be the absolute best that this property could hope for, ranging from 15 to 1792. 1792 would be a lot smaller ones, but this is a well-located, somewhat well sought after property for suburban office. We have hearings just as long and strenuous about this property too. It's very good quality for that matches this subject quite well, and they're looking at 15 to 1792. Now, the 15 is the larger sites. 1792, I think, is about 3,000 4,000 square feet. If you're looking at an overall $39,000 square feet, the 16 I think is generous and high. The next one, page 6, I found interesting. This is office was built to suit for the credit union. They built it as a check cashing facility, and about a year later, everyone went digital. This bottom floor, 850 is not actual rent. That's the owner. But last rent there at 16,415 sat vacant for 4 or 5 years, 3 years, and eventually they found someone for 850. This property is in the process of being sold. Is a number that the people are working on, and it's about 70% of what they paid for 10, 12 years later. Page 7. These are 2 of the WRHA releases that the city provided that we don't see as market, and I'll tell you why. We go to my page 8, and this is one of the top buildings, the 330 St. Mary, be a top 10 office building in the city, and a bank on the main floor, renting for 17. Now, this property is in the Skywalk. It's walking distance from the stadium. You can park underground. Very desirable office property. And then page 7 is these WRHA sites. One of them just in the outskirts of the Exchange and 650 Main, right on Main Street, close to Higgins. Like that, those would not be renting for those those amounts if they were on the open market. Like they're built for the WRHA. They build them in the 20-year terms, and the landlords get their 20 years out of them because they want to ensure that their costs are recouped before the WRHA decides that they don't want it anymore or some sort of government policy changes. And this is exactly why the IAAO would say that you do not consider government or charity leases, which the WRHA is both, as reliable comparables. Just trying to think if I need to go much more over my brief. I guess, yeah, I'll touch on page 40, which is our cap rate sales brochure. And these are for the highest quality buildings. We say that we at Colliers, who sell and controls 60% of the leases and sales in the city of Winnipeg, as our office guys here. We don't have a class for suburban A. There's no such thing in our view. And class B is 7.5 to 8.5. The page before was mispublished, this Q4 222. You notice the change is a whole point. These were just not they resubmitted older years. This was when before COVID, or during, I guess, when there was a little bit more optimism. But the Q3 was then what was realistically what was really happening in a snapshot of our market. And that is, if you need any sort of follow up on that, page 43, which was sent to the city department, showing the errors that were made. Of course, the city is still relying on the misprint that they've had corrected. And then I guess the rest of my information will be in my rebuttal. Do I want to be going straight into that, or should I be waiting for
Well,
questions?
I think what we'll do first is we'll go through questions for you at this point with the information you put in. And then after that, we will come back and go through your rebuttal at that point. Fair?
Great.
Excellent. So, Mr. Neufeld, that concludes for the moment, yes?
Yeah, I guess I just quickly summarize my value there. They didn't really state it. $16 rent, I think, is explains, or it's a snapshot of the market. The 7.75 is considerably more accurate. The rest of the parameters are opinions, a little less consequential, but they make up my value of 7.175 million for this portion. And that's just for the 40S. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm getting an echo.
Yeah, me too.
Is everybody
Might be me
getting this
again.
echo?
Me too. Yes, Mr. Chair.
Is there anything?
Been happening all hearing whenever anyone talks, come in and out.
It just don't understand. Well, Mr. Poole, do you have questions for Mr. Neufeld at this point, please?
Yes, I do. Can you turn to your page 1? I'll start with just your workup. Are you aware as the workup sits on the page that the number of 7,175,000 actually does not work out to be? When I rerun your numbers, I get 7,566,000. I'll just give you a chance to catch up to check if that is the case.
What page are we referring to here,
Page
please?
1. Page 1.
Mr. Poole.
Yeah, there is something fishy. I'm just checking my Word document here to see what happened.
Okay. The number works out on the NOI that's shown on page 1, Mr. Poole. Are you referring that there is a calculation error made above that, sir?
I get 586,330. When you're using 3% for vacancy, 2% for expenses, 5.85 or $5.85 for
Shortfall,
I could be wrong on my end, but I just want to verify for
Yeah.
the record.
I don't
Page-
think I'm seeing it. I think it adds up on my.
586,330 capped at 7.75%.
Mr. Neufeld, would you like to take a moment to do a quick recalc on that, please?
Could your error being that, and assuming it's an error, no disrespect, but possibly is it the 3% that you weren't intending for vacancy? Because that would have been my next question. Our model parameter is higher than that. So you went below our model parameter.
What number are you getting?
I'm getting 500. So we're talking NOI, or are we talking?
Well, I'm not seeing any difference in the NOI, but my math in the cap rate is off.
I'll go through it just in case it's on my end. We have $16 per, if it gets to 624,000. Then you have a 3% vacancy.
Mhm.
That vacancy is 18,720. So we should be okay. That works up to 605, 280 effective market. We're both good there. You're using 2% for expenses, structural reserve, whatever you're calling yours. Then you're using $5.85 for shortfall. That gets me to 18,950 for your total expense. Subtracted
Yeah.
from that gets 586,330. And then it's capped at 7.75, which gives
Yeah, you didn't include 5% non-recoverable in that.
you have 2%.
No,
Your-
and my under subtotal 605, then 30 grand, 5%, and
So,
2% is structural reserve. Yeah, so we're just
okay,
using the
right.
same as we've always since 2020.
Okay, right, fair enough.
Yeah. So the difference is the non-recoverables. Now this, I mean, sometimes buildings will have high op costs, so high leasing commissions. So we've always stabilized at 5%, and that's the way that the Appraisal Institute teaches.
So from what I can see, the difference between the parameters as far as the expenses go is you're choosing to use a lower shortfall and you're choosing to use a higher 2+5, 7% overall expenses, and then you're choosing to use a 3% for vacancy.
Don't necessarily agree with how you did it, but yes, that's the
As far as the vacancy goes, why would you indicate that to be a significant risk for, from what my understanding is, the dissolution of Winnipeg Regional Health Authority, the governing body that provides medical services to the city of Winnipeg?
Where am I doing that in the vacancy? I'm using lower than you.
Yeah, well, that's my. I'll come
There's
back.
still you can't ignore a vacancy risk. A vacancy is a market parameter. It's
So
not something
what
you
you're saying is there's less risk than our model that we put on it.
Well, to be honest, I put 3 because I thought you would, and I didn't think we should be arguing about it because it was inconsequential. But you put 6 because you were calling it a regular office, which is my argument that it's not, shouldn't be treated differently because it's medical. And I just decided to focus more on the rent and the vacancy.
But if you're
But I mean,
indicating that the
you're
office
right. It
market,
should be 6%.
if you're indicating that the office market is what you're indicating bad, if you're indicating that the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority has risk to vacate these properties, why would you then put a 3% vacancy on?
I didn't want to argue with you about it. I thought we'd focus on the rent.
All right,
But
moving
you
down
used
to,
6. So we're right. Let's change it to 6.
so moving down to your shortfall, is that the actual shortfall for the property?
It's not from the cost. It's our calculated estimate based off of, if you see there at the bottom, my non-recoverables, you'll see 30 grand, that's 5%. But above that, that's a estimate. It's a tax rate that we use across the city, so it might be a little off. Utilities are the assessor's business tax numbers, but it's using 2024, not 2025. So that actually should be 270. That's fine. We can leave that as is. And then the R&M is just an estimate based off of our experience and how we feel the building should see. So realistically, yeah, it's our estimate based off of the building and our data. It's more site specific.
So you're putting risk, and I just want to understand your argument for my sake and for the panel's sake. So I'm getting a lot of feedback. Your argument is that you don't feel that the strength of the lease that's in place is warranted for the risk that at the lower risk that Winnipeg Regional Health shows now. You're considering that if Winnipeg Regional Health was dissolved in some way, and these leases for all these properties, including the subject property, were somehow dissolved, that this property owner would be in trouble and have to go into the marketplace.
No, that's how they write the leases. That's what I'm not making. You're making your argument based on your conception of this building. My argument on this is that the rent is not a market rent. The rest of the parameters, I didn't really feel like having a long drawn out a debate on. So I used what I assumed would be the medical for the vacancy and a shortfall based on our calculations that are done quick, easy, and realistically they're much less consequential than the rent. We do not consider, and most appraisers would not consider, and the IAAO does not consider government leases as an accurate depiction of the market value. Full stop. That's the argument.
With that, I don't need to ask any further questions. I can address the remainder in summary.
Thanks very much, Mr. Paul. Mr. Seelan, questions at this point of Mr. Neufeld?
Yes, I'm getting quite a bit of feedback, Mr. Chair, just so you know, so it's difficult to listen and hear.
Yeah, I'm experiencing the same problem, sir. Just before you start, is there any, can we maybe take everybody off the stream and then come back and see if, once we've reconnected, if it helps?
It's just Mr. Newfeld's mic has a.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah, it's
not
just-
very good at muting and unmuting. I will keep a better eye out for it. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I'll do
Okay,
this now.
so we've narrowed it down.
I had a feeling I was waiting for someone else to call me out because it's a little embarrassing to admit, but I've been trying.
Okay, Mr. Seelan, go ahead. I think for the moment, I think we're gonna be okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So your rent comparables here, that's on page 3. You have just really quoted on automotive, and you have some retailer rent comparables, but we really don't have anything else for the rent comparables. That's your comparison chart here on page 3.
For the chart, yeah, you know, I didn't really these we built punching out 700 briefs in the year. This page 3 and 4 I didn't even touch on. 4 I think is somewhat, you know, it's not exactly in the area, but it's a bit further down the street. But I brought that as a retail office to show what other parts of the market could be doing. 3 I wouldn't rely on whatsoever. I left that in because I thought I didn't know what the rent would be from the city, and I was going to show that this is the highest end of what retail is renting, and it's much higher quality property. The rents I want to focus on start on page 5.
Page 5. Just give me 1 second here. Thank you. Do you have a table on page 5, or it's just
No, I put in the numbers and they're all active at the reference period, and then there's, you know, they're specific to each building. I wanted to give a better idea of what I was arguing with, show the pictures. You probably should have included dates in the 850, but we can test that they're all active at the reference date.
Awesome. That's all my questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seelan. Any questions, Mr. Moretsky?
Yes, I do, yeah. Just in the, first of all, with the representation that you are representing WRHA, correct? Did I get that right?
The Winnipeg Regional Health Authority.
Yeah, WRHA, yes. You're
Yeah,
representing them?
Yes, correct.
So what interest does the WRHA as a tenant have in the assessment of the property to the owner?
They are liable to all the taxes. So they're the tenant liable for not all the taxes. It's split between them and McDonald's, but the owner would control the property managers, and then they send recovery to the tenant based off of how much they pay to the city. So in the end, it's their money they're saving or not saving by an appeal.
Okay, is that kind of a unique arrangement in this industry, or is that common?
No, not at all, but it's a unique that the tenant has their own representation. Yes, that's not very common. And it's just because they're the major tenant and they're one of the major tenants in the city. So, it's common. Oftentimes, in the same, if there were 5 tenants, they would be represented by the landlord. But as the major tenant, they had their own representation.
This is the first time I've come across it, so that's why I asked the question.
Yeah, and fair enough, it's not very common in this one.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. That makes sense. So in your comparables here that you provided in general, how different are these properties, or how different or same, I want to put words in your mouth, are these to the access centers? The access centers are, medical facilities. How similar are these properties to to a medical facility?
You know, the ones I've toured, I have not toured the subject, but I've been in, I think, every other access center with Jeremy back in 2018 or so. There are offices. They're they have medical equipment in them. They're just offices, regular offices that, if they weren't being used by the clinic, they would be rented out just the same as any other offices. And that's why I wanted to focus mostly on 850 Plymouth. This is just one of the better suburban offices. It's not
Could you repeat that? 850?
850 Pemina on my page 5.
Okay,
This
so
is
that's
this
a
is
medical office? That's a
no,
medical
it's not.
office?
It's a regular office. No, it's a but the argument is that if it's not being used for a medical facility, the office itself is just the same as any other office. And I don't I mean I don't know how much the assessor would disagree. He can chirp in if he wants. That's fair to say, but I don't think the building itself is any different than a regular suburban office. It's just what's the contents inside it, which we're not even really valuing.
Mr. Chair, would it be in order to let the assessor answer that, or no?
Mr. Pohl, are you interested in wading in on that notion?
I was gonna leave a bit of argument for summary. I think I'll address that in my summary, if that would make sense. Because we're at two different positions, and I don't think we've isolated those two positions. So argument after that would be most appropriate, I would feel.
Thank you, Mr. Pohl.
Okay.
Go ahead,
I think that I've pretty much covered all of my questions here, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
thank you. Mr. Neufeld, I do have an interesting question for you with respect to 850 Pembina Highway. You are making the submission today that you feel that this is a good comparison to the subject property, correct?
Correct.
Well, I know a little bit about this property, and I'm looking at the map that goes with it. And I would note that this property, really, you can only access it, my understanding, from going northbound on Pembina. Is that not the case?
Yes, there's no, you can access it southbound. You are going through
You're going
it is
through
there.
your parking lot, correct?
Yeah, no, that would be they might have an easement between the old
So
Raisin
this
Hall.
isn't
But it would
exactly.
be similar to how our subject property would have the same thing going through the McDonald's area. So
But
but
the access is much more straightforward. You can access this the subject property from either direction, correct?
yeah, I don't think this office is really hurting much on their rents by their access. When you're driving into it, I've gone with the property managers a few times. It's retail that really suffers from access. People can drive and they say, "Oh, that's too hard to get to. We're going to go somewhere else." You go to this office, you're going there anyway. And I, don't really agree that the access is. It's quirky, and I agree with that, but I don't think it's really keeping you away from the site.
Okay.
You
And
can the overpass, I think, made it a little bit more confusing too. This they added the changed and then added a bike lane, but you can
yeah,
going
it
northbound, you can
does
turn right.
complicate the egress and access to that property, no question.
Yeah, yeah. But I
Moving
don't think
on,
go ahead.
and I appreciate your comments. The subject property is an office / medical building. In your opinion, you don't think that that should be a higher rate per square foot based on that fact?
I mean,
It
the
is for the
only
moment. And
evidence
I appreciate
support.
what you're saying. You're saying, in a way, an office building is an office building is an office building. But in fact, we see from the marketplace, medical type buildings that are going for slightly higher rates per square foot.
The cost recovery leases for these medical type businesses, buildings, not typical open market leases. I was gonna get into that in my rebuttal, that oftentimes what will happen is a landlord see that it's a government tenant, they want to get to recoup their costs as quick as possible. So all of the rents the city brought forward that are considered medical, that are somehow higher than office, are because they were done with the WRHA, and because they were done with a landlord that isn't interested in taking a risk of them leaving, so they're trying to get it and recouping it as quick as possible. And that's not really market value.
So.
That's as the
And-
assessors
and-
call it, value and
And I
use, and it's
appreciate your comments, sir. And I'm
atypical.
gonna ask you this, you just said that it's not as risky because of the fact that it's all front loaded. Is that what you just said, sir?
No, I'm not. I'm saying it is riskier. So they lock them up to cost recovery leases. So the 20 to 30 years, that's them getting all their money back in that time.
Well, if they're
When
getting it up
your
front,
regular
is it
market will
not
take a
as,
5 year.
would
Sorry.
you not agree with me then that they're getting their money up front, that maybe there's a little bit less risk at that point for them?
Well, no, they get their money up front because there's a higher risk. They can still terminate these leases, and it's not even up front. It's just one throughout 20 years. Like they're still,
But
you
if
know,
you're getting
equal.
your money in that 20-year period, that's a fairly quick return, is it not, sir?
Yes, and that's why it's not considered a typical market transaction, and that's why the IAAO would
All right.
argue that you shouldn't be using them.
I appreciate your argument. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Those are my questions. At this point, we have, your rebuttal to go through, Mr. Neufeld.
Yeah, and I guess just essentially the same thing I've already mentioned. The 1 through 13, and I believe that it emits 8. These are cost recovery leases, not based on the market transaction. I've gone through that. Multiple rolls on 4, 5, and 8. There are parking lots attributed to those rents that the city provided. It's unclear whether or not those are differentiated. 9, 12, and 13, again, those are leases between health authority and the hospital. Those are related. Then the overhold on 25, which isn't really, that wouldn't be a lease. For all we know, there could be penalties being paid because they haven't signed. Often that will happen. And I just want to go to my page 5, the very last page. This is from the IAAO. Sales to government agencies can involve an element of compulsion and often occur at prices higher than would otherwise be expected. And the governmental agency is the seller, values typically fall on the low end. The latter should not be considered in model calibration or ratio studies unless analysis indicates governmental sales have affected the market in the specific market areas or neighborhoods. Now, I don't think the people are looking across the street and saying, well, the WRHA is getting $19 there, so I should get $19 there. They're still looking at the market. That's exactly what they're saying in this. Each sale should be thoroughly researched prior to use for a listing of some government agencies in this category. The same concept with charity. This is a charity. I think it's generally opposite, that people give away rent to the charity, but it's a government charity, so people are trying to get as much as they can out of them. I don't think this is the IAAO. The city decides based on how hard the question is whether or not they're members. I have thought that all of them were members across the country. Maybe Winnipeg decides they don't follow it, but that's fine. But it's still a standard based on what assessors are meant to follow. It's what they are taught. Fair market value would not include these government leases, and that's quite evident from the literature and the theory. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Question?
I never got the rebuttal. I don't believe I was sent it by the Board of Revision. I'm looking through my emails unless I missed it. I don't really need to see it. I've heard it.
You've probably seen it a million times. Yeah,
I'm familiar with it. I'll put it that way. It's just I don't believe I ever received it. So maybe for our documentation, please send that to me. But I don't have any questions. I'll address it.
Thank you, Mr. Pohl. And in the meanwhile, Tristan, would you be able to
Absolutely, yeah.
make sure that he gets a copy of that, please? We'll move on to questions. Mr. Maritsky, would you like to ask questions on the rebuttal from Mr. Neufeld?
I have no questions, thank you.
Mr. Seelan, questions?
I have no questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
And I do not have any further questions either at that point. Mr. Paul, do you have any rebuttal at this point?
No, I do not.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, I think we are at a point where we can summarize. Go ahead, Mr. Paul. Do you want to do a summary on this? Yes,
Yes, I do.
please.
The argument that I see before you is pretty, it's not the most complex. In our position, the Colliers has brought in dissimilar properties that are dissimilar in physical makeup, that are dissimilar in tenancies, and don't reflect the subject property as it sits. From that point, I don't think they have any weight towards their actual position and value. I'll leave that up to you. I'll go up to our position. Our position is there is a marketplace here. There's clearly a marketplace here. The market isn't just what are the tenants. The market's also the owners. It's two-sided. So what we have here is one tenant throughout the city and property owners that are willing to develop their particular sites, and significantly, usually they're the only tenant or the primary tenant on a site, they'll do that for a certain amount of return. And what you see is a reflection of return is what will have on my comparable pages. So to say that that's not market, that's the definition of market. They're acting between themselves for the best interest, and you see as the rents that are in place approaching the reference state, they're hovering around. Even if you took I quickly did it, not that I had the rebuttal, but even if you adjust for those rents that they had issues with, you're still getting around $18.50. And this is a substantial building here where I feel that would get at least that or a bit above. So when you're looking at the marketplace, I don't see going to dissimilar properties. One of the things that I was questioning on the appellant was, so the basis is if somehow Winnipeg Regional Health would be able to break their leases and get out of all of these properties, or the subject property, obviously under appeal here today, that somehow the property owner would have to redevelop it or redo something with it. Well, that does happen quite significantly throughout the marketplace, as you see. But what is the risk of a government agency dissolving and being able to walk away from this? Nil. If there is one thing that is secure here, what we're discussing here today, is Winnipeg Regional Health will be around long after we are, and these leases will be in place. I don't see that as being a risk factor. I see that being, well, sure, I shouldn't say it's not a negative risk factor. It's a superior factor that would mitigate that risk, would push it down. And that's why you have these subject property or these property owners willing to develop their site for these type of properties. They're institutional type properties. They're long-term tenancies. There's usually a 30-year lease on place. And then I've seen some of the, if you read through the leases, there's actually another option to renew after that. So at this point, I feel our valuation of the property is accurate. It reflects what's actually there. It reflects the marketplace that Winnipeg Regional Health participates in with the property owners, and this is what they would lease at. And with that, I'll leave it up to the panel to make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pohl. Mr. Neufeld, would you like to give us your summary, sir, please?
We're not valuing the WRHA, we're valuing the building there. The building, WRHA buildings that are typically in the city are renting much higher than the market. We're looking at market value. We are meant to adjust sales for a model to omit or highly investigate government agencies, charitable organizations. And the atypical thing would be that these are 20-year leases. They're cost recovery leases for 20-year cycles, sometimes longer. That is not our market. Our market is 5 years. Our entire office market, you know, renting to anyone unless they're doing something special that isn't the market, will rent for 5 years. And that's what we're valuing. We brought forward the rents that are on a building, a couple buildings that are representative of that in declining office marketplace. And to add to that, the city's got this rent at $15.75 starting in 2021. 5 years. It's in his brief. We omitted it. We didn't think it was relevant because we weren't using it, but the city's got it in there too. So that formed part of his model. And we're asking for 16. On top of that, the cap rates, there's no 6.55% cap rate selling of these things. There just aren't happening in an office marketplace. The office market is working from home, and the government of Manitoba shut down 80, I'm sorry, I shouldn't quote, a large portion of the offices in the city, which was the city's major office tenant. That government's not going to start renting them again. Office is not doing well. 6.5% cap is not indicative of an office marketplace whatsoever. The rest of the parameters are inconsequential, but I think a $16 rent shows our market, and a 775 is probably on the low end of caps because an office is not selling that low. And again, the main argument, you don't use government sales. It's in the IAAO. It's on my rebuttal. You need to investigate this, and the city has failed to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mitchell. Gentlemen, with this, I believe this concludes the issue for today. And we appreciate your submissions. And thank you all for having patience in going through it all. And thank you again very much. Have a great
Thank you.
day.
Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. We're adjourned at this point. Thank you.